In today's clip, I'm going to react to an article that made me really question my level of Chinese-ness, okay, I suppose, but mainly goes to illustrate the gap between how Americans and Chinese probably view how to parent and look at what constitutes a good life. Hey, XenPuck here. Occasionally I chance upon an article, maybe once a week if I'm lucky, that I honestly can't stop ranting about, either to someone else, externally, or just internally monologue style, right? Since the pandemic has begun, my wifey's been pretty much the only subject of said rants. I think I might be driving her insane, right? So I'll try to let off steam in this venue instead. This way I won't get murdered at night by a desperate spouse. Anyway, the article at hand today, I'll link to in the description below, stood out to me because it is about how people in my old country, China, parent. It's mainly about like one super smart professor guy and how he evolved on what he can do to help his underachieving daughter, along with the common reactions from other Chinese parents on his own evolution, right? When I read it, my first thought was immediately, oh boy, I wonder if Americans would react to this guy in the same way, and how that might be different than, you know, what you could read from the Chinese commenters. Heck, I didn't even really need to do a survey, as I, a Chinese American, reacted quite differently than what the regular Chinese folks quoted in the article said, right? But first, you know, a quick summary of the article itself. Premise is simple, right? Dad's a super smart professor at one of the best universities in China, in Beijing, in this instance, where I'm from. He wants his daughter to do just as well, if not better, than he did, right? Alas, his daughter seems to be just mediocre in terms of innate talent. Dad tries to do the Asian parent thing and berate the kid into success with low levels of improvement shown and probably more harm done than good, right? He finally admits that maybe the kid's just not that smart, right? And lets go of the idea that she has to be the best academically. So far, the story is okay, I guess. But what really irked me was the Chinese reaction to this, right? People either said, well, good to know that even the best and smartest parents still have to deal with this issue that's common to all of us, or they continue to not believe the professor dad would actually stop pushing his daughter harshly with comments like, the sole factor for university enrollment is scores, and the prerequisite of finding a decent job is diplomas, and even hunting for a boyfriend or girlfriend involves checking the education background first. Yeah, quotes like that, I was aghast, so I'll break down my reaction in several different ways. Number one, how did I feel about the actual parenting described here? First, I felt empathy because the situation where the dad sounds like pretty much how my dad would try to motivate me, right? Simply by yelling. The direct quote was something like this, right? This is during the day when the professor dad is forcing his daughter to do homework. The quote is, everyone on the third floor where my office is located can hear the yelling and screaming from me or my daughter. Okay, yeah, this is rang a bell because I used to joke that's how my friends from college knew my dad, as someone who'd just yell at me for not knowing how to do something without actually ever showing me or teaching me how to do the set task, right? But that empathy towards the situation quickly shifted to other emotions for me personally, because this dude supposedly is a smart guy, right? Because he described himself as a wonder child. I'm sure he's very smart to teach at the university, the Peking University, that's where he teaches at. But clearly he's not particularly smart when it comes to parenting or human communications, because I mean, if you need to yell and scream to get your point across in any circumstance, right, that's just not classy, okay? I mean, use your brain, man. Figure out how to help your kid without having to raise your voice. Shouldn't be that hard, right, for a wonder child, right? So to me, I went from empathizing with this style of parenting to realizing its severe limitations very quickly, okay? Number two, next up is my reaction to the reaction, right? Especially where the professor dad said he would just have to accept his daughter as she is, right? And just be mediocre and lets his foot off the gas in terms of pushing her, right? His quote here I actually thought was very good. The direct quote is, parents should identify their kids' unique abilities qualities in different aspects other than academic studies. They should find a path suitable for their kids to develop in the system in that direction. This is where the Chinese reaction that was so against this idea, where they talk about, you know, everything's about scores came in, right? I totally get it, right? Back in the old country, there's a heavy emphasis on most people's parts on education, which usually I think is fantastic, right? And honestly, probably why Chinese Americans or even other overseas Chinese do pretty well because there's this cultural emphasis on education. But to say that everything in your life is only dependent on scores on academic tests, that's not entirely true, right? Even if it's mostly statistically and probabilistically true, right? I mean, to say to children that your only way forward is just very narrow, right? And that's very sad to me, right? Look, maybe some kids just can't focus at school or thrive in that type of structured environment, right? That doesn't mean that they have no value in society, right? I know that we Chinese people are pragmatic people, but this is getting ridiculous, right? No one is only their test scores, right? And as China grows into a real power in the world again, I hope its citizens can start to grow out of this kind of pigeonholing people into tiny, tiny boxes. It's just very provincial and just petty and small-minded, is all I can say. Right. Point number 3. Finally, I really wanted to compare my reaction in general against the Chinese commenters and get into why I'm diverging, or at least why I think that's the case, right? So their idea that everything from jobs to relationships depends on type scores is at its core just petite bourgeois. Not even real bourgeois, but petite bourgeois, right? And while I understand it, just like I understand why Asian American parents, right, push their children to be doctors and lawyers and engineers, it's all for the same petite bourgeois reason, right? I think at this point I've transcended that level of aspiration entirely. I mean, look, I get it, right? When a society or a group is poor and looked down upon, relatively speaking, as was the case in the modern era for Chinese people and, you know, China, right? Anywhere. I get it. Education will get people to the higher level, not just within the immediate social confines, but also on a global scale, right? I don't have a problem with that. Chinese people everywhere is getting richer as a result of this mentality. However, it only takes you so far, right? What I have a problem with is that over time, hopefully in the next 20 to 30 years, I would love to see Chinese people understand that for the truly wealthy, something like test scores measured in standardized testing is actually not that important, right? I'm not saying be hippy-dippy and not send your kids to school, okay? But look at the science of real wealthy people, right? Some will succeed in the family business, others will reject it out of spite, but none will really fail because they have the freedom to choose what they want to do, right? Test scores in academics is a foundation that everyone needs to some extent, absolutely. But we human beings also have some type of, I would call it, divine spark or X factor, or whatever you want to call it, right? This is what I've come to believe as an adult. It's not religious or spiritual in that sense, but just an inexplicable and wonderfully opaque sense that I think is true when you look at human beings, right? Truly extraordinary human beings. I'm not sure I want to be able to explain it, right? Only that it exists and is a good enough reason to not put down children who simply doesn't fit into a standardized testing mode, right? Look, as China and Chinese people get rich enough on average, we gotta level up our mentality to recognize more of the art in us rather than just the science. I guess that's my other way of putting it, right? Anyway, I say all this as someone who actually did pretty well in school back in the days. So again, not knocking the need for the petite bourgeois type of thinking, because you all need a good foundation. But I do prefer, ultimately, the American mentality, right? Where we absolutely also value college dropouts and weirdos for some reasons, because they too can do great things. Just look at, you know, the entrepreneur class here, right? Or even back in the days, railroad barons who got by hustle and street smarts, right? School is important and will continue to be for most people, but do not crush the hopes and dreams of the few that don't conform, right? Because some of those people will be much more likely to change the world at a macro level than the harshly printed out drones that the petite bourgeois conformist schooling system will produce, okay? I hope someday, in some small ways, I can also be on the forefront of changing that mentality personally by showing that, hey, even someone who grew up full-heartedly in the school type of parenting can still break out of that mold and show the world that I'm not just test scores or good at math or diplomas, but a void and maybe a fountain of creativity and of the divine. That's my spiel for now. Cheers.